know that today the workplace looks different than it did. Looks different. It's extremely globally competitive. We know of, in fact, the U.S. Chamber talks about companies that can't even compete, that will go out of business if they can't compete in a global economy, and they're on the edge. Talked to a young man who started a business. He's with Arizona Small Business Association. Started a small business about 10 years ago. It has grown dramatically, even through the recession. And now, as the economy's getting better, he has the opportunity to add employees. You know what his greatest concern is? What do you suppose? Finding those employees, exactly. So we know that employees are now required to operate differently. They need to look at that third bullet: acquire, interpret invitation, value, innovate, do things differently. And we know that low-skilled, high-wage jobs are gone. And if there are any left, there's going to be a tremendous competition for trying to find that kind of work. A complete education is now a basic requirement, and the bar has been raised from everybody going to school to everybody being successful. Okay, the organizations themselves have changed. If you can see on the left side, large pyramids, producer center, departments, hierarchy, a tight structure, rules and regulations, assigned procedures. It's not the way we work today in business. Would you agree? I suspect all of you who have got businesses would say that, in fact, we're looking at smaller companies, client centers, project teams, a flat kind of organization, improvised actions. And how the work gets done has changed also. On the left side, it's the way it used to be. Individual tasks, specialist duties, credential-based appointments. But on the right side, it's teamwork, integration of expertise, on-demand, just-in-time learning. And it's not just Arizona, it's across this country and it's across the world. This is a document, this is a chart from the Organization for Economic, OECD, as you see across the top. This is an analysis of the world. So you can see the trajectory of routine cognitive jobs versus the trajectory of non-routine interactive jobs availability across this world.
Pretty cool to me.
So ABEC, this is what brought ABEC into this kind of advocacy. We actually have an initiative called College and Career Readiness. And the goal for this initiative is to create public awareness around the Common Core standards and the way to measure the assessments as building blocks for college and career readiness. We want to promote best practices in achieving college and career readiness and create collaboration between business and education that increase student achievement. So here's what we did. We've got our project around college and career readiness started with a partnership between the Department of Education and the ACT. ACT has a whole set of assessments of student learning, and they're very active in this state. They did a crosswalk between grades achieved on the Ames test and college and career readiness benchmarks on the ACT products. And then they back mapped it down to third grade to see what kind of scores on the Ames test do kids have to have in order to be advancing toward college and career readiness. And here's what they found in that assessment. Look at this chart. What you will see in this chart, I'm going to use grade 3 reading, for example, is that meets expectations, which is what we ask for kids to graduate. Meets expectations, does not come close to college career readiness targets. If you look at grade 6, all the way along the line, meets expectations, does not come close to college and career readiness benchmarks. And more interesting is if you look at science, meets expectations, exceeds expectations on the Ames test, still doesn't come close to what we want for college and career readiness. That's an issue for us in this state, not just this state, but across this country, because we know that we want our kids to be at those measures of college and career readiness. So they went forward then, and they did a chart for every school in the state that demonstrates in a concrete way the difference between Ames and college and career readiness. This is an example of one of those charts. If you go to this website right here, you can see a chart for any school you pull up. And you have this handout in your packet so that you'll have it. You have this with you. You have it. This is an example of what you will find. This is kind of light, you can't see it, but here's 84% of students who met expectations at this school in third grade reading, third grade math. Then inside that chart, you'll see a little line that gives the percentage of those students that met the college readiness benchmark. So what it shows you is the gap across the line in terms of where we are and meets expectations and where we want to be in college career readiness. So this is not going to be a short, quick effort. This is a long-term effort to move kids into those spots. So in terms of getting kids to be college and career ready, we have a set of content standards, and content standards have been around for 50 years. When I was teaching kindergarten, many of those years ago, I had a set of content standards that I needed to know that my kids needed to be able to do. It's like a measuring stick. And so I knew that the content standards in those days, it was very low. In fact, we were focused on minimal standards. What's the minimum that a child needs to be able to do to move from kindergarten to first grade? What's the very lowest they have to do? That was the standard, and so there was a benchmark or standard for reading and for math, and that was the measure. Over the years, Arizona and other states in the country have gone back to revisit those standards because economies change and life changes. So the content standards today have been revisited again, and they've been revisited by a number of states. One of the reasons that they were revisited by a number of states is that actually it was CEOs out of the Business Roundtable that said, we got to do something about this. Our kids are not performing well. We know that we have got to have youngsters coming out of the system that can help us as companies to be able to compete across the world. We had a group of chief state school officers that said, let's go back and look at this because we got to do something better. We've got to be able to do something different. So they went back and looked at those standards again, and they said, in fact, we've got kids that come from Arizona and move to Texas, or they move on to Michigan, or they move out someplace else. And each time they move, there's a different set of those measures. We need to look at how can we make that less traumatizing for students when they move from one state to another. The other reality, of course, from business is that when they hire from across the country. So that's what started this conversation about what should the framework look like. This measuring stick. Is a measuring stick this big adequate today, or should it be more like a yardstick? So that's what they started to look at. In fact, they said, you know what, there are some common things that we know that kids need to be able to do. We know they need English language arts. That's common. That's where the word common comes from. That's common. And mathematics. We know that we need to start with those two things we can look at in common. So let's look at this framework. Let's make sure that this measuring stick is robust and relevant. Let's make sure that when we say what we want kids to know and be able to do is needed for success in college and career. Let's make sure that it's based on evidence and research, and let's make sure that these are internationally benchmarked with a curriculum that is locally developed by your school board. Now here's the urgency for you knowing about this as business leaders, is right here. The measurement, the assessment, the first assessment of these new standards is in 2014-15, and that is right around the corner. So the Common Core standards, this is, as I say, not a short-term effort. This represents a sea change in how kids learn. How many of you have got grandkids or your own children in the school system right now? Okay. Have you seen any differences in what they talk about when they come home? You have, back and back? Okay. I have too. I've got a grandson, 5 years old in kindergarten. I've seen great changes. So this is a response from the business community. Educators have said, okay, every 100 years we retool the system, and that's what we're going to start doing. And so about 5 years ago, they began looking at Arizona content standards and looking at whether or not they're adequate for what we want out in the world today. What our educators today need right now, what they need right now from you as community members, from all of us, is they need the time to be able to retrain themselves in how to deliver information. They need trust from their communities, because they know how to do it, but they need to have you believe that they know how to do it and give them the time, and they need the training to be able to deliver instruction differently, and I'm going to show you why in just 1 second. So let me ask you a question. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to think. If you had a grandson or granddaughter or your own daughter in school right now, and they go through the entire system, what do you want them to be like when they graduate? When they get out of the system, they should be what? How are they going to get there? What do they need to be able to do when they leave the system? Open-minded. They need to be open-minded. What else?
Financially literate.
Independent.
Financially literate.
What else?
Competent.
Confident. What else?
Articulate.
Articulate.
Know how to learn.
Know how to be learners. Okay.
Curious.
Great answers, you guys. That's what we want for our kids, okay? Guess what? We want them to be independent. We want them to build strong content knowledge. Wouldn't you like a youngster coming out of the system to actually understand their mathematics? What they do with it, how to use it. We want them to be able to respond to varying demands of the audience, of different tasks, of purposes, and discipline. We want them to understand deeply, to comprehend, as well as critique work. We want them to value evidence, so it's not just rhetoric they're talking about, but they know how to get the answer. We want them to be able to use technology, digital media, and they want and to understand other cultures and other people's viewpoints. Guess what this is? These are the anchor standards for English language arts. This is what we want to develop in public education. So here's how they're different, and here's the level that you often don't get to when you talk about Common Core. Here's how they're different. In English language arts, now we got two professional educators right here who may correct me when they get to when they get out of here. Well, go for it if you want to. But I'm speaking from an old kindergarten standpoint, kindergarten teacher standpoint here. In English language arts, in K-5, now there's 50% informational text. What that means is that teachers will still use literature to teach the Constitution, for example. They'll use literature, but they'll also use technical texts. So it's not just reading ACF BAT, but it's also looking at how I get information out of the text itself. How do I go back to the written word and find the answer? Or understand the issue. K-12 reading and writing instruction,